So let's move on to the second presentation. It's by Jose Luis Guerrero Quinones from Oxford Brookes University in Spain. And the title of his presentation is AI opacity versus patient's autonomy in decision making.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Hear you.
Perfect. I'm going to be only on one side because otherwise I don't hear myself and I don't want to speak too loud. I'm going to build up on the discussion that we guys had right now. I'm going to share my screen as well. If you do not mind me, this is the one. Bear with me a second. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. We can see your slides and we can
It's perfect. I don't know if you say that part at the bottom. I hope that is not a big problem. Okay. So following a bit the previous discussion, as we were saying, I might be a bit more happy about the use of artificial intelligence, and I'm going to explore whether not only we can prevent how opaqueness affects artificial intelligence and patients' autonomy, but I'm questioning myself whether by using artificial intelligence in healthcare context, we can not only avoid all the problems of opacity, but we can somehow enhance patients' autonomy. I offer here like a brief summary of what I want to be talking about. So I'm going to start offering a quick overview of how machine learning works, to then explain how the problem of opacity is important. I'm going to leave aside the epistemological issues, and I'm going to focus on the ethical aspects, the bioethical aspects, really. Then we will move on to how this has a negative impact on patients' autonomy, and we will explore the different possibilities on how to prevent it. To finally offer two main ideas, two main paths, let's say, on how this enhancement can be performed and on how it can occur. So very briefly, and like acknowledges that we are all familiar with the terms, we can, as an overview, say that when we talk about machine learning and how it works, we have these two algorithms working on parallel, where one of them learns from from a large set of data, which is called the training data, and gathers and offers at the end obtains sufficiently stable results. And parallelly, as we have said before, we have another algorithm working, which is the classifier. This classifier uses the stable results by the learner and offers a final classification of the output with a probability score. Just to see it more visually, we would have here the learning algorithm, the final model, and then the new classifier with the accuracy score. How is that a problem? How is a problem? How this affects the results that we are obtaining? The issue is the way these algorithms are formalized and the semantic knowledge including them in these deep learning networks is not based. It doesn't follow really well-defined or explicit criteria. The weights, the internal weights on the connection between the neurons, between the different parts in that algorithm are not clear to us. We know that there are stronger links between the different neurons in the different layers, but we don't know the weight that that the algorithm attributes to each specific link. Therefore, the idea of a black box. Again, like a visual idea of how these deep neural networks work. With the input layer, as I said, we don't know how these links are strengthened by the algorithm, but we know that the final output is accurate enough, sometimes even more in medical context, that the physicians or the clinician diagnosis of specific illnesses, let's say. Again, leaving aside all the epistemological problems, I'm going to focus on can we, despite this problem of opaqueness, of opacity in these black boxes, can we maintain very high ethical standards? The two key aspects for me in this case is the idea of like understanding on the patient side, the trust that the patient has towards this system. It seems obvious, at least at first sight, that we should need to be able to explain what's going on inside these black boxes in order for patients to trust the final decisions. And this is especially important where our lives are at hand, where patients' lives are at risk, because like they will decide on one course or another after the diagnosis, let's say, or they will follow specific treatment suggestions based on the artificial intelligence final outcome. We can clearly see the focus now will be on how this opaqueness has an impact on the patient's autonomy. I'm going to leave aside as well, although it's important, and I will acknowledge it later, how the decision making, there's another part of the decision making between purely the artificial intelligence device of the tool and the physician or the healthcare professional. But I want to focus on the patient. So we need to understand, we need to be able to keep in mind that for a patient to be autonomous, and also bearing in mind that it's like, well, I'm not talking about an ideal perception, an ideal understanding of this concept, we need at least, following Bucham and Childress, we need at least to be able to have these three conditions. The patient needs to be able to act with intentionality, having the intention to act. It needs to understand what is going on, how the decision, the artificial intelligence output works, at least to some extent. And there needs not be any external coercion. So if we want to trust those systems, the first thing that we need to bear in mind is that the patient needs to understand what's going on. It seems therefore obvious, at least at first glance, that it's quite difficult, if not impossible, to maintain our current notion of autonomy in this digital era. Why? Because the black boxes, due to the lack of information, or like not making available sufficient information of what's going on in there, precludes autonomous decision making. So why don't we stop here? Should we stop here? I will advocate, I will defend that, as we were discussing, like not long ago, sorry, that we need to, there are really big benefits. There are good reasons to keep using artificial intelligence in healthcare. The main one is the aspect of accuracy. It seems clear, although we could discuss, and we can leave it for the Q&A at the end, whether there is a real trade-off between explicability and accuracy. We, like at the time being, normally the more accurate systems are those that are opaque. And at the same time, I want to bear in mind this final idea of why not, like, shouldn't be, if we want to the ethical question or the ethical problem, wouldn't it be unethical, or at least ethically problematic, to stop using these systems where we could, due to their high accuracy, potentially save more lives or like have better impacts on patients' health? What I will try to do is now explore or find a way in between those ideas. So once we have good reasons to use these systems, these tools, what we need to bear in mind in the medical context is like the key role that informed consent has for the shared decision-making process that happens in the medical setting, where we don't only have a relation between patients and healthcare professional, but we also have this third party in there, which I will perceive, or which I will understand as a tool, as an extra tool much more powerful tool, obviously, that physicians have at hand. So the key idea here is informed consent and how opaqueness affects, if it does, this idea of informed consent. And I think that it's key to highlight that artificial intelligence might not present any new challenge in terms of the kind of information that patients obtain from their physicians. What is relevant is that the subject receives information which is enough to justify, provided sufficient reasons, is enough to justify the decision that is going to be made. So it will be enough for the patient to know and to have a appropriate understanding based on the specifics of that patient and how the artificial intelligence tool works, how accurate it is, why we can rely on it. That would be sufficient information for the patient to provide that informed consent, and therefore not having their autonomy hindered, or attacked or in danger. And obviously, I want to leave that aside, but I want to mention it and highlight in any way, there will always be, or I do advocate for the right to withdraw from whatever kind of AI diagnosis and treatment options, respecting this idea of informed consent and patient's autonomy. The patient, the subject, should always have the right to be offered alternative interventions. Following with this idea of how to prevent the impact of opaqueness, and once we have understood that we have good reasons to keep using artificial intelligence, that it might suffice to provide with understandable and clear information for the patient, we can still, despite the opaqueness of the systems, offer somehow different kind of explanations that will suffice for the patient's understanding. On one side, we can offer explanations in terms of contestability, where the subject will have the right of always, or at least potentially, we should develop artificial intelligence that allows us to do that, to some extent contest the final decision, and the patient should have the right to ask why kind of questions, like why did you reach that? And joining it, putting it together with the next alternative, the counterfactuals, we could, at least to some extent, or the patient could be able, and we currently, with the state-of-the-art technologies, we might be able to understand how, even though we don't fully grasp what's going on inside the black box, we might be able to establish connection between the inputs that the algorithm is fed with the final outcomes offered. So we can build up these counterfactuals, saying how there is a dependency between the external facts and how those led to the final decision, without spending much more time in the kind of explanation that could be offered. I want to focus briefly on also the paper by Bings et al. That focuses on this, another the possibility of applies that to the cases of driving, and how different driving scenarios might have different consequences of how likely it is for a driver to have an accident, considering different factors. We could build up a similar case where the demographic, the kind of input that would fit in the algorithm, helps us as patients understand how the machine reached those conclusions. So now that we can see how there is possible that we can reach that the threshold of having a sufficient understanding on the patient side, we could move forward. Now that we understand what's going on, at least sufficiently, we could speak about trust in this artificial intelligence, in the outcomes offered by them in medical settings, And I highlighted again 2 main ideas behind why and how we can trust this AI. On one side, we could basically speak of the reliability of these computers, because we know that they are reliable. We know that the results offered are to be trusted and are effectively accurate. We need to bear in mind, obviously, and we need to fight all the different biases that could emerge and that have been proved that exist. But at least if we are able to remove all the biases and all the imperfections, this kind of computational reliabilism can be achieved. And building on that, at the end, if we want to establish the similarity or effective comparison, it's not much different to what we currently do when we trust the physician, the expert judgment. We don't know sometimes how the physician treats. We were talking about the importance of understanding of how relevant our perception of medicine as an art. It wouldn't be much more different to that. We have good reasons to trust these systems and their verdicts. Finally, as a wrap up of this prevention of the negative impacts, I want to say, and I want to highlight that I advocate for keeping humans always on the loop, and humans will always retain the decisional authority. So by understanding of artificial intelligence, there's decisional support systems that will be, or they can be, super helpful for the patient. But again, humans, both together, physicians and the patients, will reach the conclusion, will reach the final decision on their own. And personally, I highlight the role of the patient because it's the patient at the end of the day who decides about their body and what's going to happen with and on their bodies. And now I want to briefly move to how once we have demonstrated that this opaqueness can be avoided, the question, or my next question here, the question that leads my research in this part is, could we use it? What if it doesn't only, what if the harms cannot only be prevented, but we can use artificial intelligence to push forward, to empower patients, although the concept is a bit controversial. We can enhance patients' autonomy with the use of artificial intelligence. We're currently delegating into these professionals, into them, the way we obtain knowledge about what's going on with our bodies. So if we can obtain that knowledge from an artificial intelligence system, there's not such a big difference. Always, again, with the supervision of another human, of a healthcare professional, having that triangular relation between the three of them. Autonomy, when we talk about autonomy, we always focus on the patient, and what matters really is that we get that as patients, we get the information from doctors who are undisclosed that they're using artificial intelligence tool for diagnosis purposes, or also for treatment options. The point here would be that healthcare in AI provides and conveys a better understanding, and I will focus on the use on how we could use big data to gain this better understanding of our health conditions, and the notion of accuracy that we have already discussed. So if we put those things together, we would have an effective boost, a careful one, but an effective one. The key aspect to maintain this autonomy will be to disclose, as I said before, clear, meaningful, and comprehensible information. So once the patient has a clear and general explanation of how the artificial intelligence works, their autonomy and their informed consent would be totally protected. Again, that's briefly and very visually the way I perceive it, the three components, like the artificial intelligence, physician, and patient at the end. And ideally, there should be clear communication. We could, and the aim would be to maintain this theoretical relationship between the two of them with the extra help of artificial intelligence. And it is here where I believe that big data, always with the concern for privacy, especially when we're talking about health data, which is highly sensitive. But we do have a lot of data. There are a lot of data, not exclusively health-related data, but a lot of data that we as patients could use in an appropriate setting with appropriate guidance. We could use to effectively improve our autonomy. If we know better what's going on, if we can gather more information about what's going on in our bodies, and always in the context of a patient-physician relationship, we could use all this information to have a better knowledge, again, to know way better what's going on with us, and therefore make better decisions. We could move towards, or we could move closer to a world of personalized medicine, when we could feed all this data, once it's protected, obviously we could feed it to being very specific and personalized treatment options, and also the diagnosis. And finally, well, I've been saying that already, it's important, or the final aim that I need to explore further and would be happy to discuss with you, is how we could, if we could find a way to feed these sensitive, even like some moral considerations, even in a very initial way, how we could feed these personalized preferences to the algorithms and to artificial intelligence in a way that autonomy is even enhanced in a whole other level. Finally, it's like 3 brief remarks. The intention was to prove or to show that opacity, artificial intelligence opacity, does not hinder or preclude patients' autonomy. That artificial intelligence can effectively improve the whole shared decision-making process in healthcare settings, while maintaining patients' autonomy and enhancing it. And obviously, all of it under the umbrella of always a partial implementation of artificial intelligence, where humans remain in control. The way I see it is as a common ground, with both humans and artificial agents need to bring the best out of it to the table and make it work in an effective way for us patients. And that would be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose, for your very insightful presentation and for bringing in this idea that AI may help enhance patient autonomy. I think this is a new aspect and new perspective on the discussion in the context of our group. So what do others think? You have questions, comments, thoughts, whatever. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Jose. So I appreciate your concerns to ensure that humans remain involved and in the loop, so to speak. I wonder if remaining in the loop has certain requirements to it. I mean, I think there's a way in which we could ask a human a question about what's happening, and yet that question would be short of remaining in the loop. For example, if a physician asked a patient which one of two procedures she wanted to consent to, but didn't tell her about a third procedure, which may be much more modest or much less expensive or much less invasive, whatever reason, the physician doesn't have a reason, has reasons not to want to do the third procedure. That physician just omits that procedure and just asks about the remaining two. I think that physician might say that she was keeping the patient in the loop in a certain sense, but maybe that there was something insufficient about that keeping in the loop, right? So I wonder if there's certain requirements about keeping the person in the loop, and I wonder if the AI will easily be able to meet those requirements.
Thanks for the question, Jeffrey. Honestly, I hadn't thought about it, and I find it like super interesting because I do acknowledge that we need certain requirements. I don't know. I mean, if we can compare the example that you just offered to the case of like keeping, instead of the patient, the doctor in the loop, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, we need to offer everything we can. The artificial intelligence, or like to the patients, we would need full transparency, not in the artificial intelligence system as such, but in all the options at hand. I don't know. I don't know if you have any ideas of which those requirements. No idea. I do agree. Like probably the first thing that comes to mind is that that notion of transparency, but again, of like at least knowing all the available options, not keeping anything from anyone. I do lack this technical knowledge to see if artificial intelligence systems could do that, or if there's a way of forcing them, let's say, to offer all the alternatives, no matter the percentage of accuracy or the recommendation, let's say. The way that I have it in mind, if we imagine like a patient with whatever condition and goes to the doctor is using an artificial intelligence system. The artificial intelligence recognizes with 99% or 95% of accuracy that is certain disease, and offer, let's say, based on the specifics of the patient, of that person, themselves, offers like 4 different courses of actions. The way I see it, like the artificial intelligence should offer all the courses, all the paths, even if the likelihood of benefits is of 4%, but you'd have to be ranked from 95, let's say 95, 20, 70 to whatever. Fully transparency. That's what I mean by being fully transparent. And it's a first thought. I haven't thought about it much more, and I do appreciate it.
Yeah, it's just a complicated issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Michael?
All right, I figured out how to use the little thing. Good.
Yes.
Thanks, Jose. I wanted just a clarificatory question. I think earlier on when you were talking about, it's like there are some kinds of explanation that are available, like to patients, or it was right after you talked about something about counterfactuals, but then underneath it on the slide there were these 4 types of explanation, and you had input, demographic, case, sensitivity. I was wondering if you could you just say again, like a little bit about like the kinds of explanation that you thought are available in this approach? Sorry, I think you might You might be muted if you're speaking right now.
I was sharing, but I was muted indeed. This is the one that you mean, right?
Let's see. Yes.
It is. It is. I went a bit. I do know that I went a bit fast over them. It's just basically in a way to explain how artificial intelligence work to a lay person, to a lay patient who has no knowledge of what's going on in there, like basically any of us. I was trying to find a way of like as a patient, from the patient perspective, what would they need to know in order to consent in an informed way? Okay, so, and I found like the 3 examples on these 3 papers quite explanatory, like quite good. Let's say the patient should be able to ask the artificial intelligence why those decisions were reached, and as a follow-up, the answers that the artificial intelligence could offer would be counterfactual. So this outcome, this negative outcome in this part of your diagnosis has to do with how much you smoke, or the impact that your smoking habits have on the final outcome are, again, 70%. The fact that your diet is like that has that percentage. The genetic predisposition that you have is that one. I don't, what I was wondering here is like, does the patient need to know much more? Do we normally know much more when we go to the doctor, even if they're not using artificial intelligence? How is that a novel problem, basically, on the kind of disclosure that physicians offer to patients? So I do believe that those procedures, those explanations are already offered without artificial intelligence and are legitimate when these tools are also offered here. I'm happy to like, I don't know, to share the slides or the references, like for further.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, that was interesting. So part of it is less. So there are 2 parts to it, right? So one part of it is, look, maybe there's not much in the way of explanation that can be offered, but that's not much worse off than the kinds of explanation or lack of explanation that patients often get already, right? That's a defensive part of it. And totally like that sounds plausible to me. And then the other part, I was just interested in hearing about, this idea that, well, there are certain kinds of explanation that could be offered to the patient. So I was just trying to get clear on, on what those were. So that's helpful. Thanks. And then I'll track down those the references. Thanks.
Wonderful. I do believe that what I've said in the whole paper is not incompatible with the idea of like keep pursuing more explainable artificial intelligence. Obviously, what I'm trying to figure out is like, okay, until we've reached an equally accurate and explainable artificial intelligence, how do we navigate? And I do believe that might be a way to, but we could find a way through that.
Yeah, good. Thanks.